Late November is a strange stretch of the calendar, my spookies. The pumpkins are fully rotten, the Christmas lights are about to be plugged in, and the weather can't decide if it wants to rain, snow, or just blow leaves directly in your face. It's the season of leftovers, hangovers, and that uncanny feeling that the year is almost over. But not quite yet. In horror history, this is exactly when things get weird. Cabin fever bestsellers get locked in the snow, miserly old ghosts come calling, Santa picks up a sledgehammer, and deep underground a group of very unlucky explorers realize the monsters didn't stay buried in the first movie. Welcome to This Week in Horror History for November 26th through December 2nd. I'm Enrique Couto, and this is the show where we rummage through the genre calendar, pull out the best anniversaries and deep cuts, and give you a spooky little guide to what was happening in horror this week in past years, because of course, the past never stays buried. Tonight we're talking snowbound Stephen King, the definitive Christmas ghost story, Santa vs. Mercenaries, a much maligned cave sequel that deserves another look, and one perfectly chilly recommendation to end your night. So let's dig in. First up, we're heading to the snowed-in roads of Colorado for Misery, released November 30th, 1990. Rob Reiner adapts Stephen King's novel into a brutally simple setup. Best-selling author Paul Sheldon crashes his car in a blizzard and wakes up in the home of Annie Wilkes, his self-proclaimed #1 fan. What follows is a two-person pressure cooker of escalating dread. James Caan sells the trapped, increasingly desperate writer, while Kathy Bates' Annie, sweet one second, dead-eyed the next, earned her a very well-deserved Oscar. This is another example, by the way, of a film that is clearly horror, being labeled a thriller so they can hand it an Oscar. But who am I to pick apart how a bunch of rich people hand other rich people little statues? Misery was made for roughly $20 million and went on to earn $61 million at the box office, a very solid hit for an R-rated film that was mostly one location. Misery proved you don't need a dozen kills or gallons of gore to make audiences terrified. Just a sledgehammer, a typewriter, and the fear that your biggest fan might never let you leave. Misery is one of my all-time favorites, especially when it comes to snowbound horror. Snow is one of my favorite elements in a story, whether it's a novel or a movie or a television series, because snow is beautiful. It makes you think of Christmas. It makes you think of the holidays. It makes you think of getting cozy in your couch. But snow is dangerous. Snow can isolate you. Snow can make you trapped. But before it does that, it's so beautiful, wistful, and fun. That's why I love snowbound horror. And if you want something tense and wintry that still feels weirdly cozy, this is the perfect late November rewatch. You can see it for free on Tubi or rent it wherever you like to do that sort of thing. Next, we drift into holiday mode and join Scrooge. Now, I know what you're thinking. Yeah, it's a ghost story. It's just become so commonplace you so easily forget. Released in the United States as A Christmas Carol, which premiered in New York at the end of November 1951 and rolled out more widely on December 2nd. Alistair Sim's Scrooge is, for a lot of horror fans, the definitive version of Dickens' ghost story. The London streets are damp and miserable, the shadows are thick, and the spirits feel closer to gothic horror than some cozy family special. Chains rattle, graveyards loom, and the ghost of Christmas yet to come points straight at a lonely grave that might still be avoided. The film did modest business in the United States, but became a staple thanks to years of television airings and, of course, home video. Now it materializes on multiple channels and streamers every December. Proof that Christmas ghost stories never really left. In fact, that's something I always found really amusing about A Christmas Carol. It was actually just one of many ghost stories told at Christmas time, but this one happened to take place on Christmas and be, to some extent, about Christmas, which led to it becoming a major part of the zeitgeist. But hey, whatever gets you to enjoy ghost stories during the holiday season, I'm happy about. No doubt about that. That's why Weekly Spooky brings you nearly a dozen holiday horror stories every single December, so make sure you're subscribed. And if you like your holiday viewing with genuine supernatural menace and a side of existential dread, this is your yearly appointment. You can watch it free on Tubi, Plex, or wherever you rent your movies. And you should rent your movies. Don't let no streaming service decide what you watch and where and how. Pfft. Now for a more recent addition to the holiday bloodbath genre, we jump to December 2nd, 2022 for Violent Night, the movie that asked, what if John McClane from Die Hard was Santa Claus? David Harbour of Stranger Things fame plays a burned-out, boozy Santa who's very much over modern Christmas. Unfortunately for a crew of heavily armed mercenaries, he happens to be on the premises when they take a wealthy family hostage on Christmas Eve. What follows is a gleefully nasty cocktail of holiday movie, siege thriller, and cartoonishly bloody action, complete with candy cane shivs and one extremely overworked warhammer. Violent Night was produced for about $20 million and racked up roughly $76 million worldwide, a clear hit for an R-rated, ultra-violent Christmas action horror hybrid, say that 5 times fast, and strong enough that a sequel moved into development almost immediately and is expected at Christmas time 2026. I really enjoyed Violent Night. It's a bit more of a bloody action movie than a horror movie, but horror should be inclusive, so I'm including it. And by the way, if you want a really great, dark, Christmas Santa Claus-focused film, head over to Netflix and watch Fat Man. It's a great, wild, fun, and fascinating take on Kris Kringle himself, starring of all people Mel Gibson as the titular Fat Man. Trust me, you will not be mad if you check out Fat Man. Even though it's not horror, go to Netflix and watch Fat Man. Add it to your list. You'll be happy you did. But as far as Violent Night goes, if you want something loud, cathartic, and surprisingly sweet at its core, this is a perfect Black Friday recovery watch. It's streaming on Peacock right now or wherever you rent your movies. And remember, Santa Claus is coming in a sequel in 2026. Speaking of bad nights, after the break, we're grabbing our helmets and switching on the headlamps and taking a second trip into one of the most claustrophobic horror universes of the 2000s. But before we get to that, I want to say a huge thank you to Cozy Earth for sponsoring tonight's episode of This Week in Horror History. They specialize in ultra-soft bamboo bedding, loungewear, and my favorite, robes. I'm a bathrobe guy, I can't help it. Can't stop, won't stop. And Cozy Earth is offering a very special deal to all you spooky listeners. If you head to CozyEarth.com and type in promo code SPOOKY at checkout, you get 41% off your first order. And every order supports our program directly. So head to CozyEarth.com, use promo code SPOOKY, and get something comfy at a great discount. And support the show. But before we can get cozy, let's put on our coveralls because we're going spelunking. What a word. As we make our own descent. See what I did there? Right after this. Don't go anywhere. Not that there's anywhere left to run. Welcome back to This Week in Horror History. You've had your stretch, you've refilled your drink, now let's crawl back into the dark. Tonight's Deep Cut Spotlight takes a cave-dwelling second look at The Descent Part 2, which opened in Ireland and then across the United Kingdom on December 2nd, 2009. The original Descent is rightly hailed as one of the best horror films of the 2000s, and I cannot state that enough. An all-female cast suffocating in caves with creatures that feel a little too plausible. Directed by the incomparable Neil Marshall, the sequel had an almost impossible task, following that act while answering, what happened next? Directed by John Harris, who was the editor on the original Descent, Part 2 picks up almost immediately after the first film. An amnesiac, traumatized Sarah is dragged out of the cave system, and instead of being helped, is pressured by authorities to go back underground with a rescue team to show them where her friends are. It's a grim bit of institutional cruelty that sets the tone. Nobody down there is really safe, neither physically or emotionally. The movie was produced for about $10 million and only scraped together about $7 million worldwide, with a very small United Kingdom theatrical run and a straight-to-video release in the US. It was written off by many as a flop and, for a lot of people, an unnecessary sequel. But I'm gonna have to disagree. There's a lot of good stuff to enjoy in the dark. The film leans into procedural horror, using the team's gear and tactics to give the first act a grounded, almost documentary feel before everything collapses. The creature work remains strong, but instead of a slow reveal, the movie assumes you already know what's down there and pushes straight into brutal, action-oriented territory. Thematically, it doubles down on the idea that human systems can be just as cruel as the monsters below. Sarah survives the unthinkable, only to be sacrificed to bureaucracy and disbelief. It's not as elegant as the original, but as a grim, muddy, monster-filled epilogue, it's a fascinating curiosity and an absolutely solid late-night double feature partner when you want to stay in the caves for a little while longer. Don't listen to the haters. It's a perfectly fun outing when you want a monster romp in the caves and a little bit more of that main character from the first film. No, it's not as good as the original, but honestly, name a couple of movies that are better than The Descent. You probably can't come up with that many. It's such a solid film, and having a follow-up to head back into the caves is just the kind of cozy nightmare fuel you need as you settle in for your turkey coma come Thanksgiving. It's free to watch on Plex or rentable wherever you do that kind of thing. Now let's raise a drumstick for some birthdays. First up is Peter Fasinelli, born November 26, 1973, known for being Dr. Carlisle Cullen from the Twilight Saga, the surprisingly warm patriarch of the sparkly vampires. Joe Dante, born November 28, 1946, the director of Gremlins, The Howling, and some of the most gleefully wild horror comedies ever made. And honestly, one of my favorite films of his, which is tough to say because you've got Gremlins, The Howling, The Burbs. There are so many films to love, but my personal favorite is Matinee. And I know you might be thinking, what is Matinee? Well, it's a 1993 love letter to the B-movies of the 1950s and 60s, starring John Goodman as a kind of William Castle type. and it's available to watch wherever you rent your movies. Check it out if after you carve the bird you need a little family fun. And we wrap up with Nestor Carbonell, born December 1st, 1967, a familiar face from Bates Motel, Lost, and the Dark Knight films, one of those, "Oh, it's that guy" presences, who keeps sneaking into your spooky favorites. He belongs to that class of actor we lovingly call that guy who was in that one thing. And I've heard a rumor we'll be seeing him in the sequel to Ready or Not, titled Ready or Not, Here I Come, which is just perfect, coming out in 2026. So raise a glass, a slice of pumpkin pie, or a blood-red holiday cocktail in their honor. For our then and now, let's take a look at Christmas horror and how it's evolved between the aforementioned Scrooge in 1951 and the more recent and wild Violent Night from 2022. In Scrooge, the horror is moral and spiritual. The ghosts of Christmas past, present, and yet to come terrify one man into changing his ways. The imagery, graveyards, chains, skeletal specters is unnerving, but the endgame is redemption. Horror shows up to save your soul. Jump ahead to Violent Night, and Christmas horror is much more physical and, I suppose you could say, cathartic. Santa isn't here to frighten you into goodness. He's here to beat the ever-loving hell out of the bad guys on your behalf. The monsters aren't ghosts of your own greed. They're mercenaries and corrupt billionaires. The fantasy isn't, "I'll change," it's someone magical and very angry will show up to protect me. Both stories use Christmas as a stage for judgment, but they reflect completely different anxieties. Fear of damnation versus fear of a broken world. I know, right? It's pretty heavy. Somewhere between those two poles lies the whole history of Christmas horror. From ghost stories whispered by firelight to blood-spattered action comedies you stream with leftover stuffing in the waiting. This week's recommendation is a deep cut, but one that's close to my black heart. And hopefully yours too, especially if you love horror a little trashy and fun. Opening in the United States on Thanksgiving weekend, specifically November 28, 1986, after an earlier regional rollout in the Southeast, I'm talking about Dead Time Stories from 1986. It's a low-budget horror anthology where an exhausted uncle tries to get a hyper kid to go to sleep by telling him 3 wildly inappropriate bedtime stories. You get witchy mayhem involving a fisherman's son and 2 sisters trying to resurrect a third, a sleazy modern Little Red Riding Hood riff with a werewolf mix-up, and the crown jewel, a deranged Goldilocks and the 3 Bears segment where the bears are a criminal family and Goldie is a telekinetic murderer who's way too into chaos. Made on a tiny budget reported to be in the low hundreds of thousands, grossing about $2.7 million in theaters, it's the definition of a scrappy cult movie that did respectable business for what it is. It's cheap, it's weird, and it feels like the exact VHS your older cousin would have rented and absolutely should not have shown you. I speak from personal experience, and actually, I really do think you should sit down and watch Dead Time Stories. The first time I watched the film from beginning to end was right after I had gallbladder surgery. I sat there on a lot of Vicodin and really enjoyed the hell out of the movie. I had just purchased the Shout Factory Blu-ray. Shockingly, I remember more than you would think from that day. It's a perfect little piece of cozy, silly, wild, nasty horror to add to your pre-Christmas season. And best of all, it's incredibly easy to get a hold of, for free. You could watch it at Tubi TV, Pluto TV, Amazon Prime Video with subscription, Sling TV, the Roku channel, Fandango at Home free, and Plex. So, you have no excuse. Get yourself a Dead Time story after your Thanksgiving stuffing. That's going to do it for this week's trip through the calendar, my spookies. But don't worry, I'll be back next Tuesday for another week in horror history. And if you need more horror in your week, don't forget, tomorrow is our latest episode of Weekly Spooky. And not only that, it's our Thanksgiving special for the year, written by David O'Hanlon, and it's a sick and wild good time. And on Black Friday, Cutting Deep into Horror returns as we talk about one of my favorite all-time horror movies, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Then on Saturday, we'll have a big fat compilation of some of the scariest Christmas stories ever released here at Weekly Spooky. And as December begins, there'll be no shortage of holiday horrors for you to enjoy. So make sure you're subscribed, and if you love what we do here, head to weeklyspooky.com/join and sign up for our Patreon for as little as $1 a month. It makes a huge difference and helps us keep the show going. Until next time, have a happy and safe Thanksgiving. Make sure the leftovers are safely labeled, and try to keep the holiday ghosts on friendly terms.